The phone rang at 6:47 a.m., and before I even looked at the screen, I knew something was wrong. Snow was falling outside my kitchen window in northern Pennsylvania, thick and quiet, the kind that makes the world feel suspended, like it's holding its breath. I was already awake, sitting at the table with my second cup of coffee, watching the flakes pile up on the deck rail. Grief has a way of ruining sleep long before it arrives. When I picked up the phone, my brother's name filled the screen. Mark. We hadn't spoken in 21 days. Not since our last argument in the hallway of Willow Ridge Care Center where our mother lived. That conversation had ended with forced smiles, clenched jaws, and a silence that felt permanent. "Daniel," Mark said. His voice was steady, controlled, almost rehearsed. "I have some bad news." My grip tightened around the mug. Mom passed away last night, peacefully, in her sleep. For a moment, the room tilted. The sound of the heating vent grew louder. The coffee smelled suddenly bitter. "What?" I said. "That's not possible. I was going to see her today." "The funeral is Friday," he continued, cutting me off. No pause, no sympathy. "I've already taken care of everything." Something cold slid down my spine. "And Daniel," he added, his tone shifting, businesslike now, almost impatient. "The will is very clear. She left everything to me, the house, the lake property, her investments, all of it. You don't get anything, and don't even think about contesting it." Then he hung up. No apology, no shared grief, just a warning. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at the dark screen of my phone, my mother suddenly dead by announcement, not by reality. I didn't cry, I didn't move, because beneath the shock, beneath the pain, something else was growing. Suspicion. My mother, Eleanor Reed, was 84 years old and sharper than people half her age. At least she had been until recently. A retired high school English teacher who corrected grammar for fun. A woman who beat everyone at Scrabble and remembered birthdays without reminders. She didn't just die quietly without someone noticing. And Mark. Mark had never been this efficient about anything in his life. I walked to the window and watched the snow continue to fall, burying the street, erasing tracks, covering things up. That's when the thought hit me, heavy and undeniable. If Mark was lying about my mother's death, then whatever he was planning next was far worse, and I was already running out of time. I didn't call the police right away. That might sound strange, but shock has a way of slowing instinct. Instead, I stood in my kitchen, replaying Mark's voice in my head, over and over, dissecting every word. Peacefully. "Everything's arranged. Don't contest it." He hadn't sounded sad, he'd sounded relieved. I picked up my phone and called Willow Ridge Care Center. "My mother, Eleanor Reed," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "I was just informed she passed away last night." There was a pause on the line, long enough for my pulse to start thudding in my ears. "I'm sorry, sir," the nurse finally said, confused. "But your mother is alive. She's in the dining room right now." The air left my lungs. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Yes, she's eating oatmeal and watching the morning news." I thanked her, hung up, and sat down hard in the chair. My brother had just declared our mother dead while she was eating breakfast. That wasn't a misunderstanding, that was deliberate. I called my daughter, Claire, in Seattle. She answered groggy but alert the second she heard my voice. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Your uncle says Grandma is dead," I said. "She isn't." Silence, then a sharp inhale. That's serious. If he's lying about that, there's a reason." After we hung up, I started looking backward instead of forward. Patterns, timelines, things I'd ignored. 9 months ago, Mark had convinced Mom to give him power of attorney, said it was just paperwork, just in case. Within weeks, doctors said she had rapid-onset dementia. She stopped calling me, stopped recognizing me, started looking sedated. I told myself it was age. I wanted to believe that. Now, I wasn't so sure. By noon, I'd called a lawyer I trusted from my engineering days. By evening, I'd booked a private investigator. And just before dusk, I drove to Willow Ridge without telling anyone. Mom was sitting by the window when I entered her room, snow drifting down outside like static on an old television. Her hair looked thinner than I remembered. Her hands rested loosely in her lap. "Hi, Mom," I said gently. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes passed over my face without recognition. But just as I stood up to leave, something changed. Her fingers tightened around the armrest. Her gaze snapped back to me, sharp, focused, aware. For half a second I saw my real mother. Then a nurse walked in, adjusted an IV line, and the moment vanished. Mom slumped back, vacant again. As I left the building, my phone buzzed, an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. "Daniel," a woman whispered when I answered. My blood ran cold. "I don't have much time," the voice said. "You need to come back tonight after 10, and don't tell your brother." The line went dead. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Because that voice, weak, quiet, terrified, was my mother's. And according to Mark, she'd been dead since yesterday. I waited until after 10. Willow Ridge looked different at night, quiet, stripped of the polite daytime routines that made everything seem safe. Only a few lights burned in the windows, and the parking lot was nearly empty. No sign of Mark's black SUV. I used my old access code at the side entrance. No alarms, no questions. My mother's room was dim when I stepped inside. A small lamp glowed near the bed, casting long shadows across the walls. For a moment, I thought she was asleep. Then she spoke. "Close the door, Danny." Not confused, not slurred. Clear. My hand shook as I turned the lock. She was sitting upright in bed, eyes sharp, posture straight. The woman in front of me looked nothing like the silent shell I'd been visiting for months. "Mom?" My voice cracked. "What's happening?" She smiled faintly. The same smile she used when she caught me lying as a teenager. "Sit down, we don't have much time." I sat. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. "The dementia," I said. "The doctors." "A performance," she said quietly. "A very convincing one." The room seemed to tilt. "I needed to know," she continued, lowering her voice. "Which of my sons would still show up when I had nothing to give? When I was inconvenient? When I looked broken?" "You were pretending?" I whispered. "I was observing," she corrected. "Your brother suggested the power of attorney." I agreed. But weeks before that, I moved most of my assets into a trust he doesn't control. What he's been stealing? I left that money there on purpose. My stomach turned. "He told me you were dead." She nodded. "He told me today I wouldn't be a problem much longer." Cold spread through my veins. "He's desperate," she said, "and desperate men make mistakes." She reached under the mattress and pulled out a small recorder, then another, and another. "Every visit," she said, "every threat, every paper he tried to make me sign, every time he raised his voice when I forgot." I wanted to call the police. Right then, drag everyone into the light. "No," she said, reading my face. "Not yet. We let him finish what he started." "Mom, that's dangerous." "So is greed," she said softly. "But it's predictable." A sound echoed in the hallway, footsteps. She grabbed my hand, suddenly urgent. "He's planning something for Friday," she whispered. "Something public, final." The door handle rattled. I slipped into the bathroom just as the door opened. Mark's voice filled the room, low and controlled. "How are we feeling tonight, Mom?" Through the crack, I watched him step closer to her bed, and for the first time, I realized this wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about erasing a witness. I stayed hidden in the bathroom until I heard Mark leave. Only then did I step back into the room. My mother was breathing steadily, her expression once again dulled, shoulders slumped, eyes unfocused, the mask back in place. If I hadn't seen the transformation with my own eyes, I would have believed the act. "You can't keep doing this," I whispered urgently. "He's escalating." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared past me, as if already rehearsing the version of herself she needed to be tomorrow. "I know," she finally said. "That's why you have to help me now." Before I left, she slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand. A list, dates, times, account numbers, names I didn't recognize yet. "Give this to your investigator," she murmured. "And Daniel, if anything happens to me before Friday, you go straight to the police." That sentence followed me all the way home. By morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The investigator confirmed my worst fear. Mark had been draining my mother's accounts for months. Quiet transfers, credit cards, a rushed sale of her lakeside property through a shell company. And then came the detail that made my blood run cold. "He's ordered a death certificate draft," she said, "unsigned but prepared. He's also booked a funeral home for Friday afternoon." My brother was planning a funeral for a woman who was very much alive. When I confronted him later that day in the Willow Ridge parking lot, he didn't even flinch. "You shouldn't be here," he said calmly. "The staff told me you've been upsetting Mom." "You told me she was dead." He smiled, not warmly, not nervously, calculated. "Slip of the tongue," he said. "You know how confusing this stage can be. She called me last night." That made him pause, just for half a second. Then his expression hardened. "If you keep interfering," he said quietly, "I'll have no choice but to restrict your visits. I'm her legal guardian, Daniel. I decide who sees her. That power doesn't make you her owner." "No," he replied, "but it makes me untouchable." As he walked away, I realized something terrifying. Mark wasn't afraid of getting caught. He was confident he was too far ahead for anyone to stop him. And Friday was his finish line. By Thursday morning, everything felt compressed. Time, space, even thought. Like the world had narrowed to a single corridor, and at the end of it stood my brother, waiting. Willow Ridge called me just after 9. "Mr. Reed," the administrator said carefully, "your brother has updated your mother's care directives. He's requested restricted visitation effective immediately." I laughed. A short, bitter sound. "He's afraid," I said, mostly to myself. I drove there anyway. Mark was already in my mother's room when I arrived. I could hear his voice through the door, soft, coaxing, the way he used to speak to his kids when he wanted something from them. "I'm trying to help you, Mom," he said. "You trust me, don't you?" I stepped inside. His head snapped toward me. The smile vanished. "You don't have permission to be here," he said. "You don't have permission to kill her," I replied. For a moment, the room went completely still. Mom stared at the television, vacant, silent, the perfect picture of decline. Mark leaned closer to me. "Careful," he whispered. "Accusations like that can get you removed permanently." I noticed what he was holding then, a syringe, capped, resting casually in his hand like it was nothing more than a pen. "What's that?" I asked. "Medication," he said easily. "Doctor approved." I looked at my mother. Her fingers twitched once, subtly, against the blanket. "No," I said. "That's not prescribed." Mark's jaw tightened. "You think you know better than her physician?" "I think you're running out of patience." He turned back to her. "Mom," he said gently, "this will help you relax." She lifted her eyes just enough to meet mine. Fear flashed there, real fear. I stepped forward. "If you touch her, I call the police." He hesitated, just a beat too long. Then he smiled again. "Relax," he said. "Not today." He slipped the syringe into his coat pocket and walked out, brushing past me like I didn't exist. That night, my investigator called. "He's finalized everything," she said. "Obituary, funeral home, paperwork. He's telling people she passed early this morning." I closed my eyes. "He's going to finish this," I said. "Yes," she replied. "Tomorrow." And suddenly, I understood the true shape of his plan. Mark wasn't just stealing an inheritance. He was rehearsing a reality where my mother had already disappeared, and daring the world to accept it. By Friday morning, my mother was officially dead. At least, that's what the world had been told. My phone filled with messages before sunrise, condolences from relatives, former colleagues, neighbors who'd known her for decades. People speaking in the past tense about a woman who was very much alive, sitting in a nursing home bed, pretending not to understand the television remote. Mark had sent out the obituary at dawn. Eleanor May Reed, beloved mother, devoted educator, passed peacefully after a long illness. Long illness, peacefully. I forwarded everything to my lawyer and the investigator. The response came back fast. "He's locking himself into the lie," the investigator said. "That means he's desperate, or he thinks he's untouchable." At Willow Ridge, the staff was tense. Not all of them knew what was happening, but enough sensed something was wrong. My mother's room had been cleared of personal items. Flowers had been delivered. Sympathy arrangements meant for a corpse lining the hallway outside her door. When I sat beside her bed, she didn't pretend with me. "He booked the funeral for 2, she whispered. "He thinks once everyone believes I'm gone, the rest won't matter. He tried to drug you yesterday." She nodded. "That was a test. Today would have been permanent." My chest tightened. "We're stopping this." "Yes," she said calmly, "but not quietly." By noon, everything was in place. Hidden cameras, audio recorders, police briefed but waiting. My mother rehearsed her role one last time. Frail, confused, compliant. Mark arrived just after 1. He looked relieved. "All set," he said, smoothing her blanket. "Everyone's waiting for me." He leaned close to her ear. "You don't have to worry anymore." For a moment, I thought she might break character. She didn't. He left, confident, believing the hardest part was over. At 1:55 p.m., I walked into the funeral home. The room was full, flowers everywhere. A large photo of my mother at 50, healthy, smiling, alive in a way Mark clearly preferred. At exactly 2 o'clock, Mark stepped up to the podium and began delivering the eulogy of a woman who was still breathing. I sat there, hands clenched, heart pounding, because I knew what was about to happen. And so did my mother. Mark's voice carried easily through the funeral home. He'd practiced this. I could tell. The pauses were perfect. The sighs timed just right. He spoke about sacrifice, about duty, about how hard it had been to let go. People dabbed their eyes. Someone sniffled behind me. And in her final months, Mark said, gripping the podium, my mother trusted me to take care of everything, her health, her affairs, her legacy. I felt my jaw tighten. She knew I'd do what was best for the family. That was my cue. I stood up. The sound of the chair scraping against the floor cut through the room like a crack of thunder. Heads turned. Mark froze for half a heartbeat before forcing a pained smile. "Daniel," he said softly into the microphone. "Please, this isn't the time." "Where's the body, Mark?" I asked. A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. He blinked. "What?" "You said she passed peacefully, so where is she?" Murmurs spread. Someone whispered, "Is this part of the service?" "She's being cremated," Mark said quickly. "Private arrangements." "That's strange," I replied, "because the crematorium says they don't have her." His face drained of color. Behind him, the doors at the back of the room opened. Gasps erupted like a wave. My mother stepped inside, supported by a walker, her posture straight, her eyes sharp. 2 uniformed officers followed close behind. People stood. Someone screamed. A woman dropped her purse. Mark staggered back from the podium as if he'd been struck. "Hello, son," my mother said clearly, her voice steady and unmistakably alive. "I hear you've been saying some untrue things about me." The room exploded into chaos. "That's not possible," Mark stammered. "She's confused. This is a mistake." "No," she said. "This is the mistake you made when you thought I was helpless." She turned to the crowd. "I apologize for the deception," she said calmly, "but I needed to know who would protect me when I no longer appeared useful." One of the officers stepped forward. "Mark Reed," he said, "you are under arrest." Mark bolted. He made it 3 steps before being tackled to the floor. As they cuffed him, he screamed, not at the police, but at our mother. "I did this for us. I needed the money." She looked down at him, tears in her eyes, voice unwavering. "You needed help," she said. "You chose theft." And in that moment, every lie he'd built collapsed. Publicly, irreversibly, and forever. The room stayed silent long after Mark was dragged away. Not the stunned silence of disbelief, but the heavier kind. The kind that comes when people realize they've been standing inside a lie and never questioned the walls. My mother remained at the front of the funeral home, gripping her walker, breathing slowly. She looked smaller now. Not weak, just human. 84 years of strength finally visible beneath the performance. People began approaching her in hesitant waves, apologies, tears, hands covering mouths. "I thought you were gone," one cousin whispered. "I was," my mother replied gently, "just not in the way you were told." Paramedics checked her vitals. She waved them off after a few minutes. Police took statements. The floral arrangement suddenly felt obscene. Too alive, too celebratory. Mark's wife didn't come near us. She stood frozen near the back, arms wrapped around their children, her face drained of color. The kids were crying. Real grief they hadn't known. That part nearly broke me. Later, at the station, the details spilled out piece by piece. The recordings, the financial trail, the medication attempts, the threats disguised as concern. The detective looked at me and said, "If your mother hadn't planned this, we'd be discussing a very different ending." That night I sat beside her hospital bed, exhaustion settling deep into my bones. "Do you regret it?" I asked quietly. She stared at the ceiling for a long time. "I regret that it was necessary." The legal process moved fast after that. Faster than I expected. When lies collapse publicly, they leave sharp edges behind. Mark's confidence vanished overnight. His lawyer stopped returning calls. The evidence was airtight: video, audio, bank records. He tried to claim he was helping her. The judge didn't believe him. Neither did anyone else. But the hardest part wasn't watching my brother fall. It was realizing how close we'd come to losing her. Not to illness, but to convenience. And how easily everyone had accepted a death that benefited one man far too much. The trial took 6 months, long enough for the shock to fade and be replaced by something heavier: shame, anger, quiet reckoning. Mark stopped looking like a mastermind once the courtroom lights stripped him down to facts. He looked smaller, cornered, ordinary. His defense tried everything: claimed stress, claimed misunderstanding, claimed love twisted by fear. The recordings erased all of it. Hearing his voice played back in court, calmly discussing paperwork while my mother pretended not to understand, felt worse than the arrest, worse than the funeral. It was proof that this hadn't been panic. It had been a plan. The doctor testified next. He spoke carefully, eyes down, explaining how prescriptions had been written under pressure, how concerns were ignored, how money had changed hands. The judge didn't interrupt. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, no one reacted the way movies promise. No cheers, no relief, just air leaving the room. Mark avoided looking at us as he was led away. His children didn't attend the sentencing. I was grateful for that mercy, at least. Afterward, my mother surprised everyone. She didn't sell the story, didn't hide. She volunteered. She spoke to seniors about power of attorney, about warning signs, about how easily trust can be weaponized. She told them something that stuck with me. Danger doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it uses your childhood nickname. One evening, months later, we sat on my porch watching snow fall again. The same quiet kind. The kind that covers tracks. "Do you ever think about him?" I asked. "Yes," she said, "but not the way you might think." She looked at me, eyes still sharp. "I think about the choice he made, and the choice you made. That's the difference that matters." I realized then that inheritance had never been the test. Presence was. Showing up when it cost something, and loving someone when there was nothing left to gain. Life didn't snap back into place after the verdict. It never does, but it moved forward, slowly, deliberately, with fewer illusions. My mother moved out of Willow Ridge 3 months later. She said she'd spent enough time pretending to be helpless. She chose a small condo near my house, somewhere quiet, somewhere real. We had dinner together twice a week. No performances, no masks. One evening, as we sat watching the sun sink behind the trees, I finally asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since the night she revealed everything. "Did you ever worry I'd fail?" She didn't answer right away. "Yes," she said finally. "That was the risk." I swallowed. "Then why do it?" She looked at me, her expression calm but unyielding. "Because I needed the truth while I was still alive enough to do something with it." She told me she'd spent years telling herself that Mark was just stressed, that his shortcuts were temporary, that love would correct greed if she waited long enough. But waiting, she said, only made him bolder. The test, she explained, was never about inheritance, or loyalty, or punishment. It was about presence. Who stayed when it was uncomfortable? Who showed up without being asked? Who didn't disappear when there was nothing to gain? "You visited me when I couldn't even thank you," she said. "That's how I knew." The hardest part wasn't losing Mark, she admitted. It was accepting that blood alone doesn't make family. Some choices sever things permanently. Months later, we established a small foundation in her name. Quiet, practical. Legal help for seniors. Education about power of attorney. Real protection, not platitudes. On the first snowfall of the next winter, we sat together again, watching the world turn white. "You know what people keep asking me?" she said. "What?" "How I was strong enough to pretend." She smiled faintly. "They never ask how strong I had to be to tell the truth." And in that moment, I understood something I'd missed my entire life. The bravest thing my mother ever did wasn't surviving betrayal. It was refusing to let it define her ending.